This episode is presented by Avalara.
Hello, this is Kate Bucher, the CFO of HubSpot, and you are listening to the CFO Thought Leader Podcast.
This is episode 897.
Demand, execution, and productivity. Demand is how much pipeline we have ahead of us. So I look at what our current pipeline looks like for the quarter, how much of that is, in a stage where we feel like we can win it this quarter. I also look at what the total pipeline is for the next quarter or two. How is that growing? What is that versus last year? What routes to market it's coming in, business partners, marketing, direct sellers. The execution side of it is that which is in front of us. It's the month, it's the week, it's the quarter. Demand, look at the pipeline. This is really the revenue side of the equation. How much of that pipeline are we getting into revenue? How fast, which regions, what growth?
Hi, it's Jack. On today's show, we speak with Bobby Leibrock, CFO of Red Hat. Last October, when it was announced that Bobby Leibrock would become the next CFO of IBM's subsidiary, Red Hat, finance team members no doubt understood that the open source developer was coronating not just any IBM veteran, but a strategic finance executive who for years had been entrenched along the front lines of IBM's software acquisition activities. Leibrock's M&A resume begins around 2006 when IBM acquired content management software developer FileNet. Fast forward to IBM's acquisition of security intelligence software developer Q1 Labs in 2011, when Leibrock is named CFO of the newly formed business unit housing the security offerings. You'll hear those stories and much more on today's episode. We'll begin after this.
This episode is presented by Avalara. That's the sound of not worrying about sales tax compliance. Because when you automate it with Avalara, you don't have to worry about collecting sales tax or tracking who and what is tax exempt. With Avalara, you don't even have to worry about new tax laws and regulations. Avalara does it for you. If your business sells internationally, Avalara has you covered with cross-border tax compliance solutions. And when it comes time to file tax returns, Avalara automatically takes care of that too, giving you one less thing to worry about. Avalara has managed billions of sales for small, mid-size, and enterprise businesses, and seamlessly works with your current sales, e-commerce, and accounting platforms. Take the worry out of tax compliance with Avalara. Learn more at avalara.com. That's AVALARA.com.
Hello, we're speaking with Bobby Leibrock, CFO of Red Hat. Bobby, welcome.
Thank you. Glad to be here. Thank you for having me.
So, Bobby, as always, we begin by asking our guests to look back for us and share some of those experiences they feel prepared them for this finance leadership role they currently occupy. What would come to mind for you?
Yeah, it's a good question. I had some of that reflection here while I took the role last fall. So I had about a 20-year career leading up to things recently. I actually started, after the University of Connecticut as a finance undergrad major. Joined IBM in New York at the time, our Westchester office.
Did they recruit you off campus?
I met them on campus, actually, at a career fair.
So it really does work. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. Went to the career fair, handed in a resume.
Wow. I want to tip your hand a little bit because there's a reason I'm asking, and that's your career inside IBM would extend to 19 years. So you have to love career fairs.
I actually did not get the first job they offered, interviewed for. They denied me my first job, and I was lucky to get an intern for my second interview. The second manager liked me more than the first, so I'm got to keep trying. So while I was there, IBM was a very acquisitive company. I was part of the software business unit. Got a chance to work on acquisitions in Costa Mesa, California, right near Disneyland over there. Also, touch acquisitions that were throughout Canada, some here in the Northeast as well. But as I think about the different experience I had, wasn't always planning to try to be a CFO. Many times had that crossroad of, did I like the sales side? Was I also interested in some of the more, business product management sides of it? But kept getting challenged to that next financial role. One of the experiences, a lot of times I had a chance to sit near other CFOs. And when I think back, I learned as much from some of the ones the good and the bad, call it that way. I learned what I wanted to be, and I learned maybe the type of leader or the type of CFO or the type of people that I didn't. So had many great bosses and learned a lot on leadership and decision making. That was probably one piece. The other side of it, after doing those jobs where you're sitting next to, maybe a position of power, they asked me to go be something called a product pricer. They gave me a responsibility of the company's enterprise content management software. I actually had no idea what that did when I took it. It was software. It was based out of teams in California and in the around the U.S. What I learned, it was actually the software that allowed me at the time to look at check imaging. Right, you deposit a check in the ATM, it pulls up, and content management was the thing that allowed the bank to go on your internet browser and look at that with that check that previously you would have got your checks in the mail. At that point in time, banks were digitizing. So I got to figure out what the pricing was, work on deals. And admittedly, why I think back at that role was so helpful to me is I went from being good at spreadsheets, financial analysis, advising, senior leaders. I was on my own and had to make decisions every day, probably hundreds of them. They'd ask, should I discount a deal? Should I change the pricing? What do you think about and at a pretty young age, I learned how to make business decisions, but more importantly, develop my confidence in those decisions. So that one really has always stuck with me. And in general, I was able to do it well enough where they started seeing clients. I remember one of the first clients I had to present to was, now Lehman Brothers, who doesn't exist anymore, but had to, take them through a view of why they should buy our software and why they should pay what we wanted them to pay for it. So it was a really interesting client-facing experience for me that really stuck with me on how to get close to our products and learn those. So that's probably the couple of experiences that jump out to me, Jack.
Now, are you being mentored along the way? I mean, you mentioned clearly you reported back to leaders and parts of the group, but are you reporting to a finance leader or someone that's part of the finance team, or are you reporting to the finance team within the software group? I don't know. Yeah.
Most of the time, most of my jobs, I always felt like I had two bosses. I had a strict financial boss, a CFO or a controller or a finance manager. And then I usually had, I was advising on my stakeholder. That could be someone that owned a head of engineering, a head of sales, eventually a general manager. And it was actually both. Usually I had dual alignment to those two. To the first part of your question, though, on the mentorship, those individuals were always the best mentors for me. They still continue to be, like any network, there's a set of people I worked for in my career that are scattered throughout other companies now. People move around a lot. But the people that could give me good advice and also kind of were invested to help me were the people that I worked for and next to and made successful in my efforts. And I've always picked up the phone. I called a lot of them before I took my current role. Last October, I was, trying to figure out my next career step and landed here at Red Hat. And I called bosses I hadn't talked to in 10 years, and that luckily still had the same cell phone number. And they picked up their text messages or answered their LinkedIn to help me make a career decision. And it's because probably that relationship I had working for them.
I have to believe, and we want to talk to you about Red Hat, but going back to that career decision,
the mothership is not all that far, and you're sort of taking one foot off.
Yeah. But at the same time, given the history of your career within IBM, it's unusual for you to do this, and perhaps the biggest risk. I don't know how you looked at it. Can you share with us your decision making at the time, and perhaps what some of your outreach to those mentors, what the feedback was?
Yeah, I think, there's a good quote I had that's one of them mentioned to me, but the outreach was, do you stay, like you said, there's a parent and a very, independent relationship, that IBM has respected since the acquisition of Red Hat. But, there is that connective piece there, but it's still not, the same as being in one of the business units like I had been in IBM. So the risk there is I went out and talked about making any change, whether it was Red Hat, I was looking to be, a larger role at a different spot. It was, yes, it's very healthy to get an experience outside. The words stuck with me, the golden cocoon of a company like IBM. IBM, other large, companies of that size and history, the processes, the amount of, IBM is hundreds of thousands of people. Red Hat's about 20,000. We don't have the same history or processes and tools to pull on. They said it'll be great to see if you can stand on your own 2 feet without the golden cocoon of IBM. And they're like, some people are very successful in a large company like that, and then they go into a smaller and medium-sized company, and they realize part of their success was maybe the company they're at, not their own personal strength. So I got a lot of push to make the change and try it out.
I want to just point out your career too, because we've had quite a number of IBMers or people with IBM roots here on CFO Thought Leader, and very often they move around quite a bit. It seems like you were fortunate enough to stay in one geography, which you're from Armonk or Somers, or I imagine New York City at times.
Yeah, I actually grew up in Connecticut. Yeah, I tell people I lived in 7 different cities actually, but they all happen to be in the state of Connecticut. Yeah. Which isn't that large of a state, as you know. I've taken the assignments where I've worked on acquisitions and traveled a decent amount. IBM has had no fair. They had their fair share of pushing for the international roles. Part of it was a personal choice. My wife's a psychologist, so she went to school for like 10 years. So we had kind of that side of it to balance. Had a couple of roles. I almost moved to London a couple of years before I started working on Red Hat, and I had a senior leader at IBM said, "Please stay put," and I'm glad they did, because after that I started, working on the Red Hat acquisition by IBM. It was a good opportunity. So it didn't work personally or professionally. The opportunities found myself locally in the New York area.
Over the years, were there, I would imagine there were other acquisitions as well that you were involved with, or was Red Hat unique in that respect?
No, I worked on, in different capacities, about 3 or 4 in a really deep way. When I described that role, I did, helping on product pricing. We actually bought the market leader. It was a merger of equals. We bought a company called FileNet for over $1 billion in 2006. Exciting, actually it was 2 ex-IBMers that were running the company. One was head of sales, one was the CEO. Prior finance guys that I got to know pretty well after we acquired them back. That was in a very disciplined, like, how do you merge their portfolio into ours from a pricing standpoint? The next time I got to acquire a company out of Boston and Fredericton, New Brunswick, called Q1 Labs. Exciting because we actually took this security acquisition and made a whole new business unit at IBM out of it, called the IBM Security Software Unit. I got to be the CFO there. And they put the leadership of the acquired company in top of this new IBM unit of all their security products. It was exciting. Those were the two ones that really stuck out to me. And others like Cognos and an analytics software from Ottawa, Canada, worked on those a lot too.
Just as you described how that unit was formed and you became the CFO of the security group, is it, there's not one approach to that. It sounded like you were saying this was a little unusual the way we did it. Am I right about that? So it seems like there might be a number of different approaches. There's not one fits all or one IBM approach that says this is how it's done.
No, I think you're right. I think IBM used to buy about 12, 15 companies, software companies a year. Sometimes like pick on one like the Cognos acquisition. It was IBM's largest acquisition before Red Hat, $5 billion. That was the cornerstone of them creating an analytics business around that whole part of their software. The security acquisition I talked about wasn't the biggest asset, but it was a security platform that connected their identity security with the rest of their data security portfolio. So I think, and then Red Hat's been the most unique, probably, right? Where they've really, recognized the, how to make Red Hat grow from this arm's length way that they do. But yeah, many different approaches I've seen them exercise.
Just curious about over the years, you probably had different roles as well when they would call you in. Is there a particular specialization that you had related to the acquisition that it would be like, yes, get Bobby to look over that, or have Bobby show up at this meeting because he's going to be the one who's got to pull that together, or give us a sense of when they wanted you involved, or
I think probably the stereotype I got in our finance teams was as the software person. So, while there's many similarities of how you approach the business from a financial side, the company had a hardware business, super cost focused, supply chain focused. They also had a services business, very labor focused, data center, and then they had a software model. And because Red Hat was a software leading company, I had a reputation of spending the bulk of my career in that part of the company. So I think that's probably the reputation I got, is doing multiple parts of finance across the software side of IBM.
Was there a sort of a time frame that most of these acquisitions happened? And again, we know different sizes might demand more time, or more complexity demands more time. But I'm just curious if there was a sort of a familiar time span that acquisitions went down, or how would you characterize?
Yeah, I think IBM has been very acquisitive, I think, through time. And I think most of the time I was spending a lot of time in there, and the business was probably around the 2010, 2006, 2010, 2013, kind of in that period there was probably the peak of the software acquisition strategy. But then, the purchase they made of Red Hat was probably the equal amount of market cap to most of those companies, right? So quantity and value, are two different things when you're adding them up too.
One last question related to M&A. There were times when deals didn't happen, or deals, got the thumbs down ultimately. Was it finance helping give the thumbs down? Who gets to flip the switch and say, you know what, this isn't as good a deal as we thought, or, to back away from something? Any insight you can share with us as to when a deal goes south? Was finance with the thumbs down?
I think, I believe, finance is going to be one of the stakeholders at those tables making that decision. And usually, an M&A transaction usually is about the value you have to pay over top of, the current value, right? So you substantiate that with synergies, as we'll call them. So how much more can you sell of that product because it's a part of your company than you can on a standalone basis? So I think the head of sales plays a big role. The engineering team, how can you plug this into your existing products to get that multiplier effect? And a lot of times the financial side of the equation is putting that together in a business case. But also at times thinking about other uses of cash, investing organically, other acquisitions. So I don't see them as having the final say, but I see them as being one of the key stakeholders.
Well, thank you for that extra bit of detail there. Let's find out about Red Hat. Can you, Bobby, tell us about this company? What does it do, and what are its offerings today?
Yeah, so Red Hat's exciting. It's not just the role and the scope of the CFO position that was offering. A big piece of why I wanted to do this was Red Hat itself and the aura of Red Hat. I got to work for about 3 years at an arm's length basis with Red Hat. Helping IBM decide with the acquisition, and then helping make it successful from the synergies on the IBM side. And just been very intrigued in a couple dimensions. One would be the people and culture. Then you've got the portfolio itself of market leading products, and then where we're going. So on the people and culture side of it, Red Hat just hit 30 years, right? We had our 30th birthday this year, just recently. But we're still that 30-year-old that feels like a kid. We've got that startup mentality, that flair, that open organization. Anyone can send any senior leader an opinion without any consequence, right? And they do regularly, right? When I joined, I got many emails on, asking me this question or that question from all parts of the 20,000 person team. But I was eager to join that culture because within that, it's one of the most passionate set of individuals you're going to work with. There's extreme commitment to our mission by the people to make each other successful, to challenge things, to harden them. And when decisions get made, it makes them more lasting decisions. So less about the products, that was more about kind of how we operate and as a company. On the product side of it, we are a growth company. That's why when IBM chose us. But if you look back, we're a bit of a unique growth company. We're high value. You go back to when, before the acquisition, when you look at Red Hat's financials, growing in the teens, producing $1 billion in cash a year. So high growth and profitable. We've really maintained this high value, high growth potential. And we're executing against that. That's why I was excited to come in. We have 3 main industry leading platforms. Our flagship would be our Linux product, Red Hat Enterprise Linux. Think about this as the thing that sat next to and went against Windows operating systems for years. And really the public cloud, the hyperscaler, the Amazon, the Microsoft of choice is Linux, and Red Hat is at the top of that market with their Linux operating system. The other 2 are more emerging parts of the portfolio. One is our Kubernetes product, OpenShift, and the other is our automation product, Ansible. Now, all of these are open source. That's the unique part about this. They're open source products that we provide the subscription and support for to run them at enterprise grade. The Ansible product is a great product that automates tasks around the data center, around processes, and we're seeing a lot of demand there for that, as well as the OpenShift one I mentioned. We did just mention an important milestone. The OpenShift product, our Kubernetes platform, it's hit $1 billion. So $1 billion milestone was achieved there. Very important milestone for any product, and it's key to really where we're headed as a go forward.
Now, I imagine you had a fairly well-established finance function, but we're curious, as you arrive, every finance leader has their own approach to how the visibility they want to achieve and what have you, and which numbers they want to see at which time. Can you share with us any changes you may have made, any reorganization that took place?
Yeah, I think, one of the I think every CFO has their background, whether that's public accounting, whether it's, an operations, a procurement, you could, mine was F&P, as you kind of look at my background, I come in with, really this financial planning and analysis background. And I was catching up yesterday with one of my managers, who reports a couple levels below me, but, she's got a ton of potential. We wanted to have a career discussion. She was very blunt with me. She said, it was very painful when you came in. You changed a lot. You really leaned on our team hard. I probably picked on that finance and planning side of the organization the most, changing the way I wanted to view things, become a lot more open and more rigorous, and create common data that goes out to the team every Monday night. They know where we are. No one doesn't know where they are at any given time. So really leaned on hard the F&P side of the equation to emerge and go influence. Influence is the word I've used with them a lot. Is we're not just going to report the actuals. That's what the accounting team can do. We need to go influence the outcomes, as an F&P function. So it's only one leg of my team, but that's probably, with my background, I've leaned in very heavily there to team with them.
So is it some of the same metrics we speak to SaaS finance leaders so often about, the unit economics, or what numbers are you looking at before your first cup of coffee?
Yeah, I think so. I live in our pipeline data. So whether it's I start with I've gotten the team in three big threads. I know these will sound like generic terms, but I'll give you an example. Demand, execution, and productivity. Demand is how much pipeline we have ahead of us. So I look at what our current pipeline looks like for the quarter. How much of that is in a stage where we feel like we can win it this quarter. I also look at what the total pipeline is for the next quarter or two. How is that growing? What is that versus last year? What routes to market it's coming in? Business partners, marketing, direct sellers. The execution side of it is that which is in front of us. It's the month, it's the week, it's the quarter. So demand. Look at the pipeline. This is really the revenue side of the equation. How much of that pipeline are we getting into revenue? How fast? Which regions? What growth? And like you said, looking at annual recurring revenue metrics. The SaaS type metrics you'd expect. And then the productivity side of the equation is marrying up the investments we're making against those returns we'd get on the revenue. So constantly looking at, what are our margins? Are we getting, more return in this region or that region? So, some of those I can look at every day. I can, drill into our dashboards and see what transactions have gone from one stage to the next. And some of them I get when we, run our ledgers and we get to do a retrospective for the month. But look at those both ways.
Now, it's been about 6 months since you arrived. No, longer. Next to 9 months almost. So can you tell us if there's a particular metric that maybe you realized the organization needed to see more broadly? Maybe there was part of the organization that you decided needed to see a metric it hadn't seen before to better educate it. I could go through half a dozen scenarios, but really I'm just looking for, is there a particular metric that you raised the profile of or brought to the attention of the organization?
I'd say, and Red Hat was going through an evolution when I got here, like many companies do that have subscription-based products to more consumption-based products. And what consumption-based products are, but just to elaborate, really, we don't get to, a client commits to something or that they might use something, but you can't, it's like a gift card, right? You don't know what they're going to use on that gift card till they go into the store and they purchase something. So we have more consumption-based offerings. Historically, we focused more on bookings. How much sales did you get commitment for? The shift that I've pushed on is towards revenue, and ARR, annualized recurring revenue. Looking at what is, when you actually decompose a contract, how much revenue by when is the client committing to? For two reasons. One, none of us are happy if we ever had a gift card that expired, right? Like you'd think, well, that store got the best of me. They got my money. I didn't have to buy anything. But you have a very upset customer, right? We'd much rather a client or customer use our products on the schedule that they're anticipating, and then they renew and we get back and we get the retention rates we want. I think that focus of shifting from bookings to revenue, and it's a mentality and it's also a tooling, you got to instrument differently. So we're in the middle of that. And I think that's one of the healthier shifts we're making.
Curious whether you're more involved with the talent function than you have been in your earlier roles. In terms of speaking to the HR leader, I would assume that Red Hat does have its own recruiting function and brings in talent independent of IBM. Not to say they can't adopt best practices or approaches that perhaps IBM has, battle tested. But what would you tell us about your, getting involved more in the human capital equation than you perhaps were in the past? Or maybe you always were. I don't know, but I would assume not.
Yeah, I think I've been connected there in the past, but I'd say the relationship is more strategic now. It's like you said, there's an inflationary environment, and we've had the ups and downs as an economy, right? You kind of had the labor shortages and then, the tightening of hiring last year, we continue to, make investments in Red Hat, but we also were, trying to figure out how we can scale with our existing resources in a lot of spots. So I've got a tight relationship with our head of our people team, our human resources team, the talent acquisition side of it. I also spend a lot of time on the motivation side from an incentive. So whether that's, the incentives of our sales teams, the incentives of our people, how do you incent them with, equity and stock versus, salary increases versus that side. So, given all of those have different financial aspects to them, I've had a lot of strategic relationships that I've built in the last 9 months with our leaders there.
Are you aware of, and I'm certain you are, but are there certain cultural nuances? It's different from IBM. It was homegrown originally. IBM's thumbprint, no doubt, is on it in certain respects, but no, I mean, it grew organically. Is some of those cultural nuances still part of the organization and still valuable to the culture and keeping people and what have you?
Yeah, I think, from a people and a talent standpoint, Red Hat's been given that freedom to operate as we have been. And, whether it's the practices around leadership development, the programs there, those have stayed intact and they have made Red Hat special and they continue to be a part of it. And admittedly, like at most companies, there's a ton of hiring we did during the pandemic period. Red Hat, like a lot of companies, has, largely been working at remote in 2020, opened up a little bit more in 2021, 2022. And here we are. I think, really it's that reflection we're having on, it's much, the IBM side of it doesn't come into effect. It's, were you a pandemic hire versus have you been a Red Hatter for 10 years? So I notice actually those types of camps, and where a lot of time spent on, how do you bridge some of the cultural learnings between those two? Because there is a culture that's in the office that isn't always the same when you're on Zooms and Google Meets and podcasts and such, in my opinion.
Was there, and again, I guess, again, you arrived last October, so it was sort of post-COVID, or we're entering this, beyond the pandemic environment. Was it a hybrid organization? I mean, did it have a philosophy when COVID arrived and how they were going to structure talent?
They had a philosophy, and I'd say, like most companies, they brought in the philosophy and it went to where the talent was. So I think Red Hat before the pandemic was a hybrid work environment. Global engineering teams, co-located but around the globe. And I, as I look at the change of that, we've gotten a lot more hybrid. We went to where the talent was, without a bias for, Raleigh or, Boston or, Czech Republic areas. So some of that becomes more challenging when you reconnect the teams, but at the same time, I've seen Red Hat be very, very connected through that and, stronger for it.
Thank you for the extra detail there. We're going to jump to what we refer to as our finance strategic moment question, which may have happened to you anytime during the course of your career. It might have happened 20 years ago, might have happened last week. I don't know. But what we want is a moment of strategic insight that you experienced along the way. And again, it might have been a risk, might have been an opportunity that you pursued, a risk you avoided. I don't know. What comes to mind when we ask for a finance strategic moment?
So as I think back, it did happen in this Red Hat role when I think all the way back, but I'll zoom in to last November. I think it was the week before Thanksgiving. Got a call from our CEO, and was new in the job. Right, I was like 1 month in. Just getting my arms around the finance and planning team, the accounting side, the procurement pieces, the kind of the legs of it. And he said, I'd like to almost double your team. I'd like to give you our sales and services operations organization to help manage that. So 1 month in, my head was spinning a little bit to take on that. But when your CEO calls, you say yes. like you talked through it, but I said, yes, I could, is this what the company needs? This is what the company needs. So I'm going to help you do this. But it allowed, it set the stage for the strategic moment. That wasn't the strategic moment. The strategic moment was, I spent the rest of, between Thanksgiving into the holidays, I didn't make any changes. I said, we're in the end of the year. We got to get we do the bulk of our business there, like most companies, right, between the holidays there, and try to get that all done in December. And this team is at the core of how we transact business. And I didn't want to disrupt that. So I spent the bulk of that quarter learning what they did, trying to figure out, do I change something? And I started getting a hypothesis that I think, a software company manages R&D investments, and then largely you then have a field force that takes it to market. And most of the F&P, I thought, decision-making, finance and planning decision-making can be done centrally because you manage, your R&D centrally. You can have some oversight in the labs. But I noticed we had kind of sister organizations throughout all of our field functions around the globe. And at times having, two senior leaders there, two teams was almost not helping our senior geography executives that we needed to support. It was almost competing or duplicative. So started to emerge and kind of wanted to take a risk of not having an F&P team in the field locally, and actually putting all of our horsepower around a field I've called business operations now. And really I've unlocked this over the last couple quarters. I created a global leader to help me do this in January. We brought all of our teams together to figure out what tasks we do. Do you help your leader look at pipeline reports? Do you self-serve them? Do you help them make investment decisions like hiring, a customer success manager over here versus hiring a direct sales or a partner system seller? And spent a lot of time in the first quarter putting details behind the assertion that we might want to have one team in our geographies and put it all under the umbrella of more of like a COO, a business operations executive. And then we really unlocked that here and announced the change in April. So you probably would have to have me back in a year to say, has it perfectly paid out? But it's been a strategic bet at this point. I think it's been a strategic moment, getting good feedback. But I think it's the right way for Red Hat to manage around the globe and have a single owner that our leaders can look on that owns facilitating decision-making for stakeholders.
From episode 883, this is 1 Minute with Javier Machave, CFO of Heathrow Airport.
And that means that Heathrow is the largest port of the UK as well. So 40% of the exports of the country by value travels in the belly of the aircraft. You have traveling with you salmon, diamonds, horses, cars, pharma, ventilators, masks, vaccines. And I think that that's one of the things that makes Heathrow special. We are literally the gateway connecting the UK with global growth. And it's not because it has huge commodities, oil, or intellectual property, but it's very much because of its trading power.
So we're going to jump to our mentoring round now, which is where we ask you several quick questions intended to inform and inspire future finance leaders. It wasn't too long ago now. We're going to ask you to look back to that first month. You were just there, actually, just touching upon it almost. But last October, what is the piece of advice you would give yourself? What is it, if you could go back in time and just say, hey, one thing, know this, what would that be?
I think listen but inspire. The team, I think sometimes leaders take a new job and they say they're on a listening tour. Like, I think don't be afraid to say, here's what I think we should go do, but I'm going to listen to you and, try to have some inspiration in the team on where you're headed. That I did a little bit of that, and I've continued to try to do more of it as I've been in the job.
Bobby, we always like to ask our guests to look a little bit on the personal side of things. We wonder if you're sort of known for a personal habit or part of a daily routine that you have, something people point out and say, Bobby's always done it that way? Not quite sure, but that's just Bobby. And anything come to mind for a personal habit or part of a routine that you have?
Gotten some feedback on this recently. So I've got 4 kids. 9 turns 7 tomorrow. I've got a son who turns 7 tomorrow on May 5th. I also have a 4-year-old and a 1.5-year-old. So I have a busy family life. I tell people I manage, family, work, and sleep, probably in that order. But right now I'm in that mode where I do a lot of bedtime. So I do have a lot of, I fall asleep usually from like 9 to 10 in one of my kids' bed. And then the team at first thought I sent lots of late emails. He's always up. I'm like, no, I actually sleep in shifts. Beginning of the night, I do some email, and then at the end. So someone's trying to teach me how to use the scheduler so I can schedule meetings that go out at 7 a.m. and look like an early bird as opposed to working in the middle of the night.
Would you have a book you'd like to recommend? It doesn't have to be a business book. It could be something you just escape with or enjoy. Anything come to mind?
I think I'm a big fan of statistics, and just going back to an old one. I like reading Outliers and Malcolm Gladwell, and anything that makes you think about a real life example and applying analytics and statistics. That's a little bit just one step removed from a software equation.
Got it. And finally, we're up to our last question where we ask you to look forward. Finally, we're wondering what your CFO priorities are for the next 12 months at Red Hat.
Yeah, I'd go back to the 3 statements I had earlier, which, what do I try to look at in the 3 pieces? Growing demand, improving execution, and improving our productivity. Really looking for us to influence across those. As a CFO team, we don't carry quotas and we don't write code. So the value we bring to the team is influencing. So I need to influence the company to make the right decisions and investments to grow our demand. I see that in pipeline. To grow our execution, which is converting that to revenue. And then our productivity. How do we apply the right amount of resources to grow faster than I'm growing on the investment side of the equation?
A thought leader.
Thank you very much for having me.
Hello, Thought Leader listeners. As you have perhaps already heard or even seen, we're now featuring the career lessons and moments of strategic insight shared by our CFO guests as Thought Leader videos. You can now find these videos on our blog at cfothoughtleader.com and, of course, our newsletters, but also on LinkedIn. If you haven't already, please go ahead and follow our CFO Thought Leader LinkedIn company page, and you'll be certain not to miss a single Thought Leader video debut. CFO Thought Leader, the #1 thought leadership platform exclusively for and by CFOs. As always, thank you for listening.